First of all, how many of you live on the Caper Islands? Show of hands, please.
Can you, actually,
Most all of you.
What towns do you guys live in?
Full-time or part-time?
Oh, in Plymouth, is that
Full-time,
the
full-time residents.
It is today, sure.
Okay.
And so, how many of you folks live in on the Outer Cape, like roughly Truro, East Ham? And what
Full-time.
about on the
I own a
lower?
business in East
Yeah, what's your,
My name's Sarah Sherman. I live.
what's your business? Are you
Hoppert Real Estate.
Okay,
in
yeah,
East
yeah,
Ham.
nice to see you. And then what about folks who live in like Orleans? Anyone who lives in Brewster? Harwich? Chatham? Only one Chatham person. Dennis? Yarmouth? Barnstable? So this is mostly sort of a lower Cape group. Okay, I just want to get a
Wellfleet.
Yeah. Well, okay, Wellfleet, I said Outer Cape. I'm from Truro, and Leslie's from Provincetown.
So again, just because these are kind of sensitive to the issues, how many of you rent your primary residence? Show of hands.
Yeah.
4, 5, 6. Get them up. It's hard to see from back there. Thank you. How many of you support the new tax?
We support it from the standpoint, but not for these kinds of people here.
Okay.
How many of you don't care about the new tax? How many of you think you're in opposition of the new tax?
And can I ask how many people?
I just wanted you to know
Yep.
where there is.
No, and how many
Well, I
people
think I've
vote?
clarified that.
As their voting address is here in the Cape Islands district.
Yeah, well, that's what I guess I would.
Great.
prefer to
No, that's
know.
helpful too. Actually, that's really good, right? To know that there's folks who are both seasonally year round. Just so we're clear, there really is no sort of like one tax proposal. There's been a menu of proposals that have been put out there, right?
True, but they all sort of boil down.
Yeah,
to
exactly.
1 and 7.
Yeah.
I think that's what people are. How many of you rely significantly on repeat tenants year after year? Pretty healthy number. How many of those that you just raised your hands can pass the tax on to those repeat tenants?
Could or would?
Nobody? Well, I mean, if you're faced with a tax, it's kind of what are you gonna do?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what about? I'm just.
And then,
Maybe
so if
you
you
wouldn't.
can't pass it, so nobody thinks they can just pass the 11% on and get away with it?
No.
Really?
No.
Nobody, okay. Then what are you gonna do? Are you gonna lower your rates or let the tenants go?
Sell the house.
Sell the house. Sell the house.
How many
No,
people?
It's not funny.
No, 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 we're not
This
laughing.
is a
No, I'm
really huge issue,
Could
Senator.
you
My
raise
wife
your
said,
hand?
don't ever laugh at it.
No, sir, can we get just a show of hands of who will sell their house? I know you said it, sir. So there's 1, 2, 3, sir. you
And I
want-
when, depends when.
I'm
We have
just-
to know the bill. At some
The
point, I
question
wanted to
was-
sell the house.
If sold out, could you put your hand up again? My apologies, thank you. 1, 2,
And a
thank you
baby.
very much.
How many of you think you would just sever your relation with those repeat tenants and just take your chances on the open market? Would you take that approach?
You
Yeah.
have you have one back there?
So I
Really
think what you're
depends.
seeing is that about what our best estimate, and this has been
Yeah.
our strongest argument, is that a third of our tenants, the tenants that we essentially bring to these guys are repeat.
Yep.
And you can see that they're scared to death
It's
of losing those
hard
repeat
to get repeat tenants.
repeat tenants. And when you get them, you hold on to them for dear life because
Yeah.
they're, so I think that's just an important message for you to hear.
No, and just so folks know, you know, I don't know how much you know about my background, but I grew up in Truro. I grew up in a seasonal restaurant. My family owned Adrian's Restaurant in Truro for 28 years. So I spent over 14 seasons waiting on tables. I really have a good sense of what those repeat customers are like, both from the folks who come, who are here sort of seasonally, but then also the folks who come one or 2 weeks a year. They come the first 2 weeks in August. You know, you can see them every year. You wait on them. So there's a lot of folks who make, and members of my extended family, you know, for years have had traditions of coming to the Cape. So I really appreciate how that works, and I sort of understand that. Yeah.
I'd like to ask one more question,
course.
because there's a group of us here who I trust all pay taxes at the end of the year to the IRS in the state
Yep.
of Massachusetts, so you're collecting revenue. I represent a whole group of my friends that I know who will just say, I'm gonna go off the grid.
Yeah.
I'm not going, so why don't you ask that question, how many of us know people who will go off the grid, and then Massachusetts will actually have less revenue at
So,
the end of the year?
Actually, this is my biggest, one of the biggest concerns I have on this, and it's, it's a little odd to talk about, right? Because I think in being honest, I think we've always had sort of an idiosyncratic economy here on Cape Cod, on Martha's Vineyard, on Nantucket. You know, folks have always sort of had to cobble together a life to make it here, right? You do the Cape Cod shuffle, the Nantucket shuffle, the Martha's Vineyard shuffle. You know, you have 2 or 3 jobs in the summer. You know, you move into sort of a cottage, which on your property, which like may or may not meet sort of housing code standards, so you can rent out your house. You know, I'm actually sort of, from an actual impact perspective, I think I know of individuals, and I suspect you folks do as well, who currently rent their properties, often to repeat customers, who are not using kind of WeNeedaVacation.com or another sort of public source, who do it sort of off the books, who don't claim that income. And I think that's actually a piece that a big, you know, yes, there's a piece of it, there's sort of there's a tax avoidance piece to it, right? But that the $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 that people are making, right, that goes unreported is really critical to their survival here. That's especially true in just my kind of anecdotal understanding on Martha's Vineyard, on Nantucket, on the Outer Cape, where you have much more of this idiosyncratic economy, right? But this is a place there's very few kind of 9 to 5 sort of steady income jobs, especially in the outermost reaches of the district I represent. And so those are actually the folks I'm most concerned about, the people who, you know, I think that currently aren't already sort of participating in that system. You know, and I think this is going to be a shift. I think I sort of see it akin to how, you know, frankly, we changed unemployment law and the unemployment sort of rules, you know, recently in the sort of good old days, right, in the 70s and 80s. You know, business owners would go and would actually go to the town hall to collect unemployment in the off season. So I think that's the piece actually I'm most concerned about.
So to her point though, getting less revenue potentially for the state of Massachusetts if this is passed, where other people would come off the books, they would bury this and not present their revenue to the IRS, to the state of Massachusetts, because of this added burden of tax.
I think the biggest shift actually is how people have been going about having a vacation here, right? So, you know, maybe several decades or so, you would rent your home through sort of word of mouth. I think now increasingly we rely on using very accessible platforms, right? Like WeNeedaVacation or whatever else that is readily, easily accessible. So I've talked to the Department of Revenue sort of about compliance, and they actually feel in the direction the industry has gone, it's sort of increasingly harder to get your home on the market, and
So
that's going to
you're
be
talking about VCAs, right? So the voluntary collection agreements that Airbnb is engaging in with certain municipalities, so that they would collect and then remit the taxes. So
No. I'm talking about the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, and from a compliance perspective,
Right.
basically saying, well, how, you know, because I sort of had a question, how the hell are you going to comply with this? And, you know, how are you going to, you know, and how do you do it as well? You know, the other question I have is, how do you do this in a way that's not overly burdensome, right? If this has to be, you know, if this is sort of like a weekly or even monthly thing, like that's a real headache and a pain in the neck. And on the compliance piece, what I was told from the Department of Revenue is that because so much of this is done sort of online, it now can be much more easily tracked, right? Fraud can be tracked more easily.
Yeah, not
Add some to that.
In our case, Senator, we do not collect any rent if it's totally, we're an advertising business, and we do not collect any of the money from the vacationer. We would not be collecting any of the tax. This would all be put on the shoulders of the homeowners.
I'm aware of that. I'm saying that if you weren't paying that tax and you were listed on the site, it would be very easy for
But somebody, you have to hire
investigators to
someone
figure
to
that out.
regulate that.
No, I
This
mean,
is gonna be a burden to the towns or the state.
It's not the
There's
towns.
It's the Department of
The Department of Revenue already
Does
has
this.
an investigation arm of that. Yeah.
Every Department of
Cause some of
Revenue
these,
has a lot of
some of
tax
these
collectors.
websites don't put addresses on there. They have a Google map and there's like a pin, and I mean, how do you know that's the house or that's the person or who's the owner? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think fraud's a concern, but I think by and large,
It's
I
not
think
really
most
fraud, it's just that there
individuals
isn't,
I think most people
I don't understand how they
comply.
figure it out, like,
Yeah, sure.
you know, anyway, I'm,
Yeah, Joe, I'm sorry.
The last kind of question I wanted to ask, just again to give the senator a general sense of, again, a show of hands. Raise your hand if your rental expenses, total rental expenses for your rental home is greater than the rental income that you make.
What do you mean by expenses?
Your
rental expenses.
Up to your rental expenses, the rent that cost you to hold your home exceed your income.
Yeah?
Because I think there's a perception, well, you would know better than this, Senator, of course, but outside of the Cape, people think we're all rich and rolling in it, don't they?
Oh, no.
And
Actually, I would ask too, how many people have used rentals to be able to enable or sort of supplement your ability to purchase a home here and help pay for that mortgage? Most of you, right? Yeah. I mean, I have actually, friends of mine from Boston who recently have looked at, who actually have bought property, places like Providence, rely on, in part renting it, in part to pay for that mortgage. I was just wanted to confirm. Yep. Yeah, can you break down the expenses for me?
Can we get a couple examples of people to break, sir, you were talking about that?
Advertising,
Yeah.
utilities, security, local taxes, state
Mortgage.
taxes, all four components of your mortgage, PITI,
Okay.
and insurance, it's in the PITI.
Yeah.
Cleaning,
Association fees?
yep, association fees, you name it, there's about 10 of them.
Septic system, rebuild the septic system, huge, I just did it,
Okay.
15 grand.
Just
So
your
that's-
general maintenance.
You got it, we're just trying to get an
Cleaning.
understanding of what this is. Ma'am?
I'm retired.
Depreciation?
I rent my house because I can't afford to live there
Yeah.
unless I rent it. So it pays my taxes. I've used all my money to upgrade my house. I still have one bathroom that needs, because my house is 46 years old.
Yeah.
I painted it, landscaping, so I don't embarrass my neighbors or myself. I mean, if you're retired and don't have a lot of money, that really pays to keep your property.
Yeah, no, I
Property
mean,
value up there.
I totally understand that well. I mean,
Mind if I close this, is not
actually, so my parents actually, for the past several years, actually my parents have always rented sort of a room or two in our house, like first it was to staff or to family. But in recent years, they've actually been using Airbnb, but it's been, frankly, to help them make ends meet. And that, we have a lot of people living here who are living on fixed incomes, or have limited incomes, right? Because there's only so much money you can
I'd
make
like
here.
to know how many people here are living on fixed incomes.
Pardon?
I'd like to know, have a show of hands, how
Oh,
many people here.
yeah, how many people are living on, yeah, that would be great.
I'm not talking about more.
how many here live on fixed income?
Can you do a subset of that? No, well, how many here are retired? Wow, most of you,
Yeah.
thank you. And so that's what we mean
See,
when you're
the
meaning
problem is
fixed income,
cash
correct?
flow, when you get older, you're fixed income.
Yep.
And the only way you can get it, if I sell this house and get a cash flow, now my kids said, don't sell, so
Yeah.
I enjoy going down, they wanna go down in the fall, and
It's a
then
supplementary.
the thing.
No, this is a
If
real
not-
conversation. I mean, this is a conversation in my family. This is a conversation in, of a lot of my, peers, right, who grew up here, who our families are here. Frankly, if I look at my cohort, right, a lot of us actually have moved home to the Cape. The only way we're able to do it is because our families have a foothold here, right? This is a profoundly unaffordable place. And actually, the unaffordability piece has been driven, quite frankly, by individuals purchasing second homes here. We have an out-of-whack real estate market
I think it-
where it goes to, I'm just saying, just where it goes to the highest bidder, and what's increasingly happened both for middle class and working class folks who live here, and middle class and working folks who are basically looking to retire here, right, who buy a second home, frankly, to kind of come in here. That the increased cost has meant increasingly, right, you gotta rely on some way to figure that out, right? And so I think for a lot of folks, that's through renting. you know, this is a big challenge, yeah.
This
We
one
haven't
has
said-
been, wait, sir, this one has been relocation.
Yeah, I want to just go back to the revenue piece
Yep.
of people coming off the grid. And, you know, a question that I have, I used to rent through the Cape Cod Times.
Mhm.
Now I use WeNeedaVacation.
Yeah.
Same thing, just a different.
Yeah,
platform.
different technology, yeah.
Also use a local real estate office.
Yeah.
If a local real estate office rents 1 week for me,
Yep,
they send me a 1099, okay, for $2,000 that I have to report. If I rent through Airbnb, I don't get that 1099 until I exceed $20,000 or 200 rentals. So there's a group of people that can totally stay under the grid, okay?
So you said unless it's $20,000?
$20,000 because they're issuing 1099-Ks.
Got it, rather
And the
than interest.
1099-Ks are for, you know, they came in once the internet came in for that platform for when there was internet transactions. And really, one of the big impetuses behind that was the money laundering option, but
Yeah.
people were,
What
okay?
about, and then you said, forgive me, $20,000 and then how many rentals?
Or
per month?
200
Yeah.
individual transactions.
Yeah.
So someone that rents their home, you know, 2 days, you know, 1 or 2 nights, could easily get to 200, you know, to 200
Yeah.
transactions.
Yeah.
Not, you know, but, so then you're relying on those people to self-report. Okay, the other
Yeah.
question I have is, what kind of state taxes does Airbnb and VRBO remit to the state? Because they make money in the state. They make money, if I list with them, they make money from me.
Yep.
Revenue is leaving
They
the
make
state.
money from the person
You're driving
who
business
rents,
too.
2 separate, you know, I rent, and the owner gets charged $200, the person renting gets charged $200. Airbnb gets $400 off of that.
yep.
And how are they paying state income tax on their money?
You know,
Because they're
yep.
just saying, they're rolling it over and
Yeah, yeah.
saying, it's our administrative fee,
Yep.
but it isn't.
I don't know the answer to that question. What I do know, and I'm under no illusions,
Mhm.
you know, the reason Airbnb has been so enthusiastic in supporting this
Go
is
ahead.
that they're basically hoping that, I think their intention is that, in sort of supporting a revenue generation, that the state is gonna be lenient or not really looking at sort of the regulation side of it, right? And there's a real question about, you know, what sort of what sort of health and safety standards mean, you know, that we're talking about what this is gonna be in. But I think Airbnb and other larger entities support is frankly because it's part of, you know, if we're supportive of the revenue, we hopefully won't have a burdensome regulatory scheme. I'm actually concerned about, so prior to this position, I worked for the Department of Public Health for the state of Massachusetts for 6 years, and 3 years of that time was the policy director for environmental health, which includes the community sanitation program. So we enforce the housing code. I know how, you know, how I think if you look at most responsibilities of the sanitation code, of restaurant inspections, you know, you pick a local health issue, that is implemented by the local board of health. There's 351 distinct local boards of health. And I know from a workflow perspective, you know, they're not able to get to the existing sort of inspections of restaurants and of hotels and motels that they're sort of required to do under regulations. You know, I really worry that we know that basic core tenets in the housing code, right? No matter if it's whatever the housing is, right? You gotta have certain things. We know those go sort of unenforced. And so I really worry and I try to keep a keen eye to say, all right, how we go about looking, you know, this train's moving, but how we go about the requirements that we have or don't have really is gonna make a big difference, not only just for individuals who are owners, but for the actual ability for us to actually enforce anything or provide, you know, health and safety. I think the more sort of burdensome onerous proposals, especially like in the Michaelwitz bill, I think are just not realistic. I don't think, you know, even if we all agreed that, you know, whatever the sort of inspection scheme was,
They're designed for the state.
it wouldn't happen, you know.
Well, you know, and on
The
the
town of
insurance,
Brewster couldn't do
on the
it, yeah.
insurance piece of that, where I know at one point it was mentioned that homeowners would be required to carry a large liability policy.
Yeah.
And I used to have an umbrella liability. As soon as I changed my home and said I'm renting 6 to 8 weeks a summer, they yanked.
They yanked it.
They
yeah.
yanked it, and I cannot get it unless I become a corporation. So, you know, if you put that kind of requirement in.
Yeah.
Is it because you're a certain amount of time these days?
Yeah, because I'm not a business, I don't have, some insurance company says, I can't, you know, you don't have any backing behind you, it's just you, they just yank the policy. It's very easy to get, but then as soon as, I mean, I had it for years.
Yeah.
You
If
can
I
get a
could
policy, it's
just,
just.
if I can
only
interject
the-
a question here.
I haven't even.
One,
Yes, I did the same thing, that's one.
Thank you.
one of the, our biggest issues, and on behalf of all of you and our thousands of other homeowners, and I've been speaking with homeowners the last couple of years about this. I mean, I've been dealing with it since 2006, but this really has not come to the point where there's been a lot of interest in it until the last couple of years with Airbnb units in the urban areas. But one of the biggest issues that concerns that homeowners have is to go from 0 tax 1 year to 12% in just overnight, so that 1 year you're not taxed at all as a vacationer, and the next year 12% is, or nearly 12% is an onerous tax, and we wonder if there's any way that it can be, if
Phased
you're going
in.
to do it at all, phased in over a couple of years, because this is a tax that, you know, is just not, is not gonna.
You know, I think that's a good question. Just to break down what we're talking about from a proposal perspective. So the current existing room occupancy in the Commonwealth is 5.7%. Then municipalities have the ability to add what's called a local option onto that. That has to first go before town meeting, probably on notice, has to go to town meeting to be approved. So for the municipalities on Cape Cod, all of our towns are actually at 4%, with the exception of 4 communities. I believe it's Barnstable, Brewster actually is at 6%, Provincetown, and is it Chatham's the other one? I believe it's Chatham. So the, whether it's the 11.75 or it's actually going to be 9.75, that there's going to be a variation there. I think the phase-in is something that I'm curious about as well. I think from an implementation perspective, there's just the, you know, the nuts and bolts of like when this gets done. So there was talk of, actually in the Senate budget, there's a proposal that essentially, basically it just sort of takes the room occupancy that we have for lodging and just expands it, but doesn't add new regulatory criteria. But there's a real question around when that can be implemented. When are the towns going to be able to vote on that? So I think an effective date piece is something that we often work on in legislation, and I think is, you know, whether it's the, you know, I could see a scenario where, you know, the state excise goes into effect and the local option would happen next year, or something to sort of stagger it. I think that, I'm curious about that. I don't think that's a bad idea. I think in some communities it's going to exactly look different depending on where you live, right?
Does everybody understand that it's gonna go, that 6% is gonna go back to town meeting? Okay, I just wanted to make sure you know that you had another bite of the apple.
And the other person that I'd like to advocate for is that family that comes on vacation. You know, that's who it's gonna hurt the most, and that is, you know, probably 50% of your increased revenue for all the businesses on the Cape are your local Bay Staters who come here, and they're the ones that are gonna feel the pinch and no longer come and no longer spend the money.
Yep.
So, you know, you're gonna increase a tax on one business, but you're gonna see the other businesses go under because they're not getting the money,
Yep.
so it's.
With your repeat customers, I'm just curious, like, how many of those, what percentage of those are Massachusetts residents? Like, is it New York, Connecticut? Where else are folks coming from? Because that's something that I think is important to know.
You know, mostly Massachusetts
Mostly
and Connecticut.
Connecticut, maybe New York as well.
And I get one for New York usually.
Yep.
That last week in August.
Okay. Which is the nicest week.
Excuse me, could I make a suggestion? Joan said that she had gathered a
Yeah,
lot of
we've
these
got
questions.
that.
We haven't heard any of these yet. Could we have these next and then individual ones?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yep,
Thank
I
you.
think we should start in. One of the questions, Senator, is could there be an exemption for homeowners who rent their primary home?
I think that's a good question.
Primary and second.
Well, that
No,
So in other words,
let's
I'm
let's
moving to my
primary
cottage.
and second might be tough. I think that the primary home piece, especially right for individuals who do that shuffle, I think that that's a little for me that's a little different, right? And that is,
Who move out, I mean, that's the.
who
Twice a
move
year.
out, but who move out and who go live, frankly in like subpar conditions to make it work.
Right.
I think that's something. There is a.
It would have to be the full home, because a lot of the Airbnb stuff is renting, the room of your primary residence.
Yeah.
Those are what we're trying to
And
exact.
in some of the proposals, so actually in the Microwitz proposal, which I think you folks find extra concerning, but in the Microwitz proposal, there are tiers, so that if you are renting your own primary residence, that's taxed at a lower rate than, say, if you bought, a building in the North End and are renting, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 units as a business.
Right.
Right, and I think that the idea of that, I think the idea that the tier seems very complicated and burdensome, but the idea that there's some difference for, especially for primary residents. I don't know if you do it under a certain threshold. I don't know how you identify that primary resident piece. That folks often talk, and there's a suggestion, in the suggestions for mitigations that you guys proposed, which I actually like, around, well, is there a way to kind of tax like that second homeowner, right, who's like wealthy enough to pay, and is not renting their homes. What we run into is that like the definition of who's sort of a year-round resident and who's sort of seasonal, it's funny, right? I mean, I know there are folks who are, spend a lot of their time, their like spiritual home, right, is here in Brewster. Maybe they're registered to vote in Brewster, but if you count the nights they sleep, maybe they sleep more in Boston. I think on those sort of pieces, we've looked at that from a legal perspective. I think the way to look at it is actually, I think, is less in saying, oh, you're year-round and you're, seasonal, because those definitions change. I think looking at the value of the property is really important. My predecessor, Dan Wolf, kicked around a proposal to have what's called a bifurcated property tax. We'd have to change a lot of state law to do this, but basically the idea you'd set a certain threshold, so the town could say, that property valued, $500,000 and less pays a certain property tax rate, and those valued above $500,000, just using it as an example, would be taxed at a higher rate, right? So going to the value of the property, the tricky part about that is for some of us here, right? We either inherited land or you bought in a while ago, and so you may be sort of land rich but cash poor. But I think those are also proposals that I think should be looked at, and given, we have a real housing crisis here. If you look at it from a population perspective, we are declining in population. We're the oldest county in Massachusetts. We're one of the 3 oldest counties in the country. And so we have not been creating enough housing production for year-round folks. And because we have a real limited supply of housing production, and the value of our property is so much, that's actually forced a lot of us to help make ends meet, either by renting it or by having multiple jobs. But I think a big priority for me is if we don't sort of arrest what we're doing from a zoning and from a housing construction perspective, this is not going to be a sustainable community. My generation will not be able to sort of persist here and be here, and I think that's really important to look at. So I think, if anything, I think we're going to need to look at more policies, I think, that help enable a sustainable community, and I think asking people to pay, part of that is asking people to pay their fair share. And I think we've seen, I certainly have seen the legacy of a society that, from a post-war era really invested in people, primarily white folks, right, did not invest in African Americans and communities of color. That really been eroding, and my generation, frankly, inheriting a mess from a housing perspective, from that's a whole other conversation. But I see that. I think the piece around looking at the primary, that's something I'm interested in.
I think it'd be single family, primary residence and vacant type thing.
The other talk is sort of a number of weeks, right? So if you only did it 4 or 6 weeks, or that's what also has been discussed.
Why that?
I don't know why exactly. What I think trying to figure out that, understand that people, you tend to say, hey, I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks, You know, come and stay in my house, you can rent it, you know. There's something about that that's sort of a little different maybe than saying, all right, we've got a 15, 18-week season, you know, and we're making sure that we're renting it every week. I think is the thought behind that.
Senator Cyr, where's,
Governor Baker, said in his budget, he said that.
Guys, we had ground rules, you know what they are, come on.
Governor Baker in his budget had said that he would like to exempt anyone who rented for less than 150 days out of the year.
Yep.
And last summer, he said that, and he specifically said, I do not want to tax Cape and Island homes. He was very strong on that, and I'd just like to know how you feel about that. I mean, we would all love it if there were a cap that was, you know, somewhere around that, or, you know.
Yeah. So my understanding is that that proposal, just from a reality perspective, is considered sort of dead on arrival in the legislature. One, I think from a revenue perspective, it just doesn't bring in, if you're gonna do this, you might as well get the maximum revenue. I think that.
The idea of no cap, maybe?
So there's definitely a talk, I think, of some sort of cap, right? Whether that is that 30 days, is that no days, is that 90 days? I viewed, and I think most folks on Beacon Hill, and I think you'll see the governor would admit this as well, is that the 150-day proposal that was in his budget was sort of a conversation starter. I think that for the other piece for this too is the local option for our communities, and I cannot, you know, I cannot undersell that expansion of room occupancy is going to mean a significant amount of money specifically going to Cape and Islands communities through that local option. You know, my job is to go advocate for this region on Beacon Hill. You know, and the first thing people say to me when I, you know, go in and say, hey, Brewster has this need, Truro has this need. If we look at, you know, the number of folks who are struggling with this on the Cape, run Nantucket, frankly, the biggest challenge is a preconceived notion, right? That this is a very exclusive, you know, wonderful, wealthy place. And you know, look, for 8 or 13 weeks out of the year, this is a paradise for many people. But if you look at health, wellness, income, a whole host of outcomes, you know, we're the epicenter of the opioid epidemic here on the Cape. So my job, right, is to argue for more resources to communities, but also realizing that just the math of who represents, right? We have 8 people who represent Cape Cod in a 200-person legislature. And so if expansion of room occupancy likely means probably the only infusion and increase in local aid that our municipalities will see. I think this is why town meeting in many of our towns has voted overwhelmingly for this. And I think towns are, at this point, you know, really eager for this and counting on this, and I think that if they're, right, without sort of this additional local option, you know, I think that it's about, you're going back to like that property tax base. And I really feel that, you know, I think broadly, property taxes, especially here, can be pretty regressive, right? Because we have people who are living on fixed incomes, people are land rich but cash poor. So if we're just relying on property tax increases to, you know, dredge out Wealthy Harbor, which is totally mucked up, and we're getting a little help from the Army Corps of Engineers, right? But the town of Wellfleet's going to need to pitch in that money. This $600,000 a year that's going to come to Wellfleet through expanded room occupancy, that's a big deal for a little town. And so I think that's also why that the exemption, the 150-day exemption, would specifically hurt Cape and Island communities.
What about the wastewater?
So, yeah, no, actually, I was going to go into it, and I realized people, my comments have been long. So I think wastewater, I think folks really know this is a major challenge that we have.
How does the bill tie to it? We all know the issue, but how does the bill tie to it? Because the bills we've read say nothing about it.
So Sarah Peak has filed, in Sarah Peak's legislation, there is a proposal that would allocate a certain percentage of the tax. There's actually
11.7.
Actually, of an additional 2.75%.
Let
me walk you through this. We have basically a $4 billion problem, right? And under the plan that was approved by the governor, DEP, EPA, the goal is that half of that, the $2 billion of that's going to be paid by our communities. 25% will come from the state, and 25% will come from the feds. I can't speak to the federal environment, though I think interestingly we may see some infrastructure dollars. So in looking at, you know, what vehicles moving and where we're gonna see new revenue, you know, my colleague Sarah Peak and other members of the Cape delegation have been looking at expansion of room occupancy as a place that we can get some dollars to address this. So, you know, this is something that the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, I think they have over 1,300 members, has identified wastewater as their #1 priority. They have convened a task force that has worked with every member of the delegation. We have a mixed delegation here on the Cape, right? We're Democrats and Republicans to work on this issue and to look at how would you use expansion of room occupancy in part to get some additional resources for wastewater. So Sarah Peak's bill puts an initial proposal of actually doing what, it's akin to what cities in Boston and Worcester and Springfield have done around room occupancy in their convention centers. And so it's an additional 2.75% that's levied on that. Really, it's meant to be a conversation starter. I think you try to, you know, just like in the room occupancy piece, right? You try to set the goalposts and then try to figure out a place that's going to work for most people. I think that, you know, this is something that the Cape Cod Chamber is completely behind. I mean, this is a pro-business group. They've identified the biggest threat to tourism is wastewater, and that they feel that some of this new money that we're getting, whether it is whether it is a carve out or a chunk of the local option, whether it's a portion of the state money, right, the state is taking, whether it's an additional amount, needs to go to what, you know, should be going to wastewater. And I think that, you know, for the Chamber's perspective, you know, this is not a tax-friendly group, and this is not a liberal group by any means, but their members have overwhelmingly identified this as an issue that we have to address. And I think, quite frankly, if we don't address this, you know, if we don't have clean water, we all got nothing to sell, whether that's in, you know, my family's restaurant or, you know, the homes that you're renting. What I focused on is the actual mechanism around sort of how we're going to allocate these dollars. So I put a proposal in the Senate budget to create a Cape Cod Water Protection Trust. That's something that we're working to create in advance of in advance of room occupancy moving. The idea as well is that, you know, you would try to find multiple sources of funding. But the truth of the matter is, if there's no assistance from the state or federal government, and that if towns don't work together, the cost to implement, and we're under a quarter to do this, and frankly, actually last week, Conservation Law Foundation brought the suit, made a presentation to a number of Cape and Islands leaders, business leaders and civic leaders, and basically said, we're watching you guys and we don't think you're complying. So basically implying we're threatening to bring you back to court. You know, I think many folks here, I think, may come from MWRA territory. I think if you do, you understand how significant those costs are. And I think the costs to implement this $4 billion wastewater cleanup, if it's just on property taxes and on betterments alone, will be pretty untenable for a lot of people. You know, instances where the betterment cost is as expensive as your whole property taxes. And so I think there's a piece of this that we have to figure out, you know, the wastewater, you know, challenge that we have here. And to be clear, you know, an area like Pleasant Bay is going to need to require a 36% reduction in nitrogen levels. And Waquat Bay, which is shared by Falmouth and Mashpee, 80% reduction. Right. Just, I mean, the numbers are huge. And so we've got to really figure out a way to do this, otherwise we've got nothing to sell. I don't think, you know, room occupancy, so the idea and why room occupancy has been talked about is because there's some thinking that, look, if you cross the bridge and you flush a toilet, you've got to be part of the solution. So how do we figure out, how do we get people who cross the bridge to be part of that solution? I mean, now we could have a water tax or like a toll for crossing the bridge. I mean, there's a whole host of ways that you could get it.
Make this tax go directly back to where it's supposed to be helping it instead of going not to the general fund. That's the thing, the 5.76, why can't that just be not going to the general fund and just come back to the areas that need it? Because that's my problem with this is we're gonna see this money leave the Cape and with the promise that it's gonna come back and help us, but we don't have any, I mean, it's like the car side. It's supposed to help. It's been around since World War II. It's not helping roads.
Well, no, and honestly,
It's not going away.
the room occupancy, the existing room occupancy is meant to be used for tourism promotion. And if you look at
But
what's in.
unless that's written into the law.
No,
I
and
think
it's written into the law, and we don't do it. The governor in his budget didn't fund it, didn't allocate the resources. The legislature has done a little better, but not much. And so, part of the challenge, right, is that, this is an area of the state that brings in significantly more money into the general fund than we take back. And opportunities like this where the state is going to get more resources and our communities are going to get more resources. And
I just didn't see a guarantee that it's going to come.
But the guarantee piece is in tourism. I'm saying we had a guarantee there and it's ignored. So I totally hear your point and I agree with you. I also just don't. The politics of this are such that we're only what's sort of possible is that anyway. Did you have more questions? Or?
Can I ask one question? Just one question. Yeah.
Sure, sir.
I think it's very important, the things you're talking. We talked a lot of things, and there's no consensus here. I really believe what I would like to do is, how can I find a way to work with you? And maybe the rest, someone in this group, you sound familiar, but we haven't focused and said, here's a consensus we would like to make an amendment to have 120 days maybe. That would probably solve most people. I don't want to say that's it. I want to see a consensus. My sense is a simple thing like that, based on what I've heard people say here, would be in that area. In the 150, 120 days would solve most of the problem. I'm not saying it. I want to get together. I'd like to take the time, if necessary, delay a vote in the bill till we have a consensus. I'm willing to spend all my time. Really, I happen to be retired. I'm willing to spend some time. I've had a lot of, I won't give you my back. But anyways, I'm willing to spend the time, and I can do it. Work with you and work with people in here if they're willing to spend the time with me.
Absolutely.
Going all over the place gets you nowhere. You have to focus. We'd like to do this, and this will take care of 70% of the people, and you will probably lose very, very little money because this is a small group. You mentioned it would be huge. Yes, with the big B&Bs, with Verbo, that's what the problem is. You're talking about doing stuff with water. That's not the issue. You understand? We're talking about taking away vacation homes. And we never talked about the bureaucracy, how we're going to have to maintain it and hire people to deal with inspectors and all that. That's a whole other issue. That's not knock us off. But I need to ask you right now, what can I do, what can you do to help me, and I'll work with you. And anyone wants to join me, I'll maybe work through her. I'll spend a lot of time. I'll get specific financial dollars and all that.
I really appreciate that. I think that actually in the suggestions and mitigations that you put down here, there's some actually good ideas that might actually have traction. This is a lot from a consensus perspective. There is already a consensus on Beacon Hill, and there's already a consensus among voters who attend town meetings on Cape Cod, on Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard, that broadly expansion of occupancy is going to happen. As I said sort of at the beginning, right, like my position on this, even if I was like completely opposed to it, would very unlikely would not change the outcome of it, just given where we are. But I think these suggestions and mitigations around, how do you, looking at what regulations, if any, what those requirements are going to be. I think the phasing in over years. I think looking at, from a revenue perspective from communities, looking at how do you bring in the resources that, of the folks of real tremendous wealth who are here for a very short time. How do you do that? There's both, the proposal here around finding a way to tax properties that are valued at a higher rate. I mean, I sort of welcome all of that, and I would, let's continue to have a conversation about that and figure out what the language could be. The tough thing is, until we have a bill, it's really hard to say. There's been a menu of proposals that are out there, and really I think it's like once we see the bill, we'll see in the bill, for instance, in the proposal that comes out, regulations will be here or they'll be here, right? Depending on where that is, you may want to focus and you may want me to focus and us to focus, you know, on that area or another area. So I really welcome the feedback, and I actually think that the suggestions and the mitigations that you have, that you listed here, at least in the sheet you gave me, those are not bad ideas, and I think they merit further fleshing out.
I think, as you can see, we're a very local company. We're dedicated to the Cape and Islands, so our heart and soul is in this, and these guys and the other 5,000 of them that we represent are really passionate about this, and we're more than happy, Joan and I, as the owners, to be a conduit or help you in any way we can funnel opinions once we get that final bill. We've had trouble reading several copies and not knowing quite what to yell about.
Yeah, no, there's a lot. There's
you don't know where to begin.
Yeah,
it's overwhelming. What do you think the timing is on the Joint Committee's production of a bill?
So I think timing-wise, so we're going to see there is a proposal that was adopted in the Senate budget. That basically it's a flat expansion of room occupancy, so it just sort of extends what we currently have for hotels, motels, and B&Bs to any sort of short-term rental. There's very little regulation in that, but it's pretty broad, right? You rent a room for 2 nights, 3 nights, 4 nights, or you rent a room, you know, almost every day of the year, you're affected by that. So that's in the budget. That may emerge from the conference committee, which is likely, the conference budget is likely to come out next week. I don't think it will. If you look at the House proposal, and specifically Aaron Michaelowicz's proposal, who's the fellow from the North End, who's the state rep, that is, actually is a much more sort of complicated bill. And so I actually expect that you'll see the House put out a bill, a version of the Michaelowicz bill, either in July or in early September. I think you'll see them debate that and pass something. Then I think it'll kick it over to the Senate. I think you'll see the Senate do something similar to what we did, right? So sort of a broad, not terribly complicated, but definitely sort of a broad interpretation of short-term occupancy. And then that would go to a conference committee to get hashed out.
That wouldn't be until the fall.
So that probably wouldn't be until the fall. So, and honestly, the further along
that might happen at the end of July.
And the further along this gets, right, we get into September, you know, our conference reports in October, you know, then legitimately, we're in a really tough position to say, like, all right, we're going to start adding a tax when you already have sort of like the bookings. So the timeline of this is actually already leaning towards some sort of looking at like what's the effective date of this. Yeah. Also, there's just a process for the Department of Revenue to sort of bring this on.
I mean, procedurally, I think you're well aware, because you're very familiar with this market. All of us collect money in stages. So
yeah.
We could get some of the money for a rental for next summer before the bill passes, and some of it after the bill passes. What the hell do we do that?
And so I think,
so they've got
so I think those
like
specific kind of conundrums and questions,
right.
Those are the kind of specific things that you'd want to work on to propose in an amendment, right? That you want to propose to the.
Should we do that after there's a joint, or because we've been doing what we're doing here, and I mean we've been to I don't know how many hearings with Michaelowicz, and we met with the Senate and you, and I mean we met.
Yeah, and I've received
I've
received like hundreds of emails on this as well, and I reply to everyone personally, and give a pretty thorough like kind of explanation of my thinking and try to explain where we are. And we'll continue to do that. I think digging in on some of these ideas, and you know, I think if you figure out there's consensus sort of in the group, you know, do you folks care of the challenges that you have, right? Is the phase-in more important, or you know, are sort of limited regulations important, right? With prioritizing that, right? Figuring out what sort of like the 2 or maybe top 3 things.
The regulations, we've been in Michaelowicz's office, and we've been to 2 of his hearings, and so he knows us by sight now. He's scared.
Getting sick of it.
He's getting sick of us, or vice versa, or something. You know, it's good.
You're pretty sick of it.
He's trying really hard to listen to everybody, but when we've said that these regulations need to be local options, he seems to shake his head on that one.
Yeah.
And believe that one size doesn't fit all. Because, you know, we were at the State House a couple days ago, and for 4 hours, and it was 95% of it was about Boston. It had nothing to do with vacation rentals. It was all apartment rentals and Airbnb and these pseudo hotels that have grown up. I mean, it's a world we don't know anything about. So they're in a whole nother, this bill is, as the domain of this bill is way past anything we're talking about here. which, you know, you have to kind of respect. They've got a tough problem on their hands. But he seemed, long and short is he seemed to believe the regs could be local options, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that, because some of them are really draconian for a vacation rental. ADA or whatever it's called, that's.
He's actually said that after the meeting,
Yeah.
Julie wasn't able to meet the meeting in Barnstable, I was there.
Right.
I talked to Representative Mike Lewis after that. He agreed that he'd like to see some flexibility for different regional
Right.
aspects.
Right, so I think we may be in
So that's-
good shape
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest concern that I think we all have is kind of the shock to the system that this is gonna create. Whether you wanna say that vacationers aren't gonna come anymore, or homeowners are gonna have to eat the money's gotta come out of somewhere. And as you saw with my little set of questions about repeat renters, that is a big piece of it that people feel, and that's gonna be a shock to these folks and other who depend on this income to pay their mortgage and their
Yeah,
insurance
yeah.
and so forth.
That's why the phase-in aspect.
Why a phase-in or something, or if it's gonna it's inevitable. I mean, of course, our first position is don't do it at all, but it's pretty obvious that's kind of a dead, you know, we said what we can say, and that isn't gonna help. But if we can mitigate it and phase it in, do something to reduce the shock on the tourism and on the good homeowners here, then we'll at least feel like we've talked a good
And
friend
the
for a good
fairness
reason.
issue, I think I'm worried about how this is going to be regulated, and I'm just harping back to the Airbnb point that you made about they don't do the 1099 until there's $20,000 spent. Why can't the state say, well, you can't do business in our state unless you give everybody a 1099? I mean, and say that to big companies, because I feel like you're kind of getting a little bullied by the big companies.
I'm gonna look into, I know my parents got some sort of 1099 something from Airbnb, so I'll look into that sort of specifically.
I mean,
And actually, I'll follow up with you on that, because
You know,
that's something that's gonna be
very
followed up on.
important,
No,
because that'll take care of a lot of the people trying to go under the radar. And
Yeah,
they know
It's gonna be a VCA, so.
I think though fairness is a really
Right,
So they're
an
gonna
important point, and I think
No, I
that if you
understand
look
that.
at,
but
Guys,
We've got an extra, we've got till 3:15, I was able to move the schedule around. There's a couple people
Thank
back
you.
there that did not have a chance to speak. Could we do that? Would that be all right?
Sure.
So
I just have a quick question.
Thanks for your patience.
May I have clarification on?
Hard to get, hard to
Thank
get.
Quick question. Can I have clarification on what the precise problem this expansion is trying to solve? I have not seen or
Yep.
read that anywhere.
okay, so the initial piece of this is an equity question, that the way people have vacationed here and just across the country, right, has changed. So 20, 30 years ago, if you were gonna go visit someplace, you were either like staying with family or friends, or you were renting out a hotel and a motel. States across the country established room occupancy as a means of basically saying, all right, these are visitors who are in our community, we're gonna tax it because it's, OPM, other people's money. I think as, in the last decade, actually I think here in the Cape, that's actually been changing, for years. I think I can talk about this actually through
I
my.
vacationed in the 50s, weekly rental in Dennis, and in house, so.
But I think the
It's been a long time.
the construction, the housing boom that we saw in the 90s and the 2000s here, with a lot of second homes and homes being rented out. I can actually speak from the restaurant industry perspective. That actually changed how people used restaurants, right? People increasingly would come here for a week or two. Instead of if you're staying in a motel, you're gonna go out to eat at a restaurant. If you're staying in a house, you're gonna actually probably likely to stay in and to cook. So how people, this is something we noticed in the restaurant industry, that with the right, my family had a business from 84 to 2012, and in looking at talking to a lot of colleagues in the restaurant industry here on the Cape, in the seasonal restaurant industry, right, how people vacation just changed, and so restaurants had to adapt to that, et cetera. But increasingly, right, people are vacationing where they are not staying in a hotel or a motel, but they're staying in an Airbnb, a VRBO, a home that's rented. People want, from I think an experience perspective, want to be able to sort of have a home and be with family. So as as behavior has changed, how our communities sort of, those room occupancy dollars, right, have been decreasing. And so the lodging community feels that it's very unfair that their guests, right, pay a surcharge, but your guests don't, right? And so that's where the impetus for this came from. And then I think, we've tried to look at, more recently saying, all right, what are some of the bigger challenges we have in the region? If this is happening, how do we sort of target those dollars to wastewater and so forth? But this comes out of an argument from the lodging industry, really about fairness and equity in that frankly, how people vacation has changed. How many people were renting out their homes 30 years ago in this room?
Yeah.
Right, and so that has changed, right? And so that's what this is response to. Does that make sense?
I see and hear fair a lot too, and I guess I question, what does that mean? What does fair mean with the tax? When the lodging industries have certain tax benefits, or, they can do things that we can't do as homeowners. I have to pay my full property taxes. I can't say, well, you know what, I rented it out for 8 weeks, so those 8 weeks, I want you to drop my property tax, because you're gonna tax them now. So you're getting, it seems like a double tax. Whether I have my home or not, you're getting my property taxes.
So look, no one likes paying taxes, but I think that, I know the tourism industry on Cape Cod. I grew up here. Trust me, it is the numbers to make a hotel or a motel work, or an actual business work, they are far much more at a disadvantage than individual homeowners who are renting out rooms. I mean, they are. But I'm telling you, this is where this came from. And so, folks in our communities, right, didn't hear from you folks. This is where this came out.
It didn't come from Cape Cod, though. It came from Boston.
No, wait. Can I say, this idea, the proponent of this has come from Cape Cod, and this started with votes at our town meetings to do local options. So this issue has come from Cape Cod. I mean, this is before I showed up.
So in East Cape, we can't vote. We don't live here, and we own property. We don't have a vote in town.
So
I don't have a vote to say yes or no to that.
Because we, in our constitution, we have one person, one vote. So
I just want you to know, on a town level, I don't get to vote on that.
But I know, but I would encourage you, almost selfishly, right, because I want more constituents. If we have a population problem, you folks clearly care so much about this place. Under Massachusetts residency law, I know many people who do register in Provincetown or Truro or Wellfleet, and this is their second home. So that's what I'd really encourage, because we need people involved in our civic life. This is where this comes out of, and it has come, honestly. The vacation rental piece came before the Airbnb piece. Airbnb is what, 6-7 years old, I think. So there's a few other people in the back going, hey, how are you?
I'm a former motel owner, so I can talk about it from that perspective as well. Motel owners have a lot of advantages that home rental owners don't have. In other words, your per unit cost of insurance, of taxes, everything else is a lot lower when you divide it by per unit. So that's not, you're comparing apples to oranges there, okay? And the other thing, I had sent you some suggestions, which is, number one, rather than having this be part of the room occupancy tax at all, have it divorced from that argument. Make it a totally separate tax that's only on vacation rentals, and it's at a set rate across the state, so that in Brewster we're not paying 2% more than we are in Eastham, or whatever, so that when somebody they can rent a house in Brewster or Gloucester or Boston or whatever, and it's the same vacation rental tax statewide, just like they do in Maine. I happen to also own property in Maine. We have 2 vacation rentals. When we sold our motel, we just decided to say, okay, we'll do this for a little bit longer until we get our Social Security, and we can retire. So we bought a couple more homes to do vacation rentals. 2 of them are in Maine. Maine's got a statewide tax. It's in Bridgeton. We have one in Bridgeton, one in Brownfield. They're the same rate, 9%. In the state. So if you were to consider just do a statewide tax for vacation rentals, have it a flat rate, have it competitive with other states. One of the concerns that I have is when you start adding, now my house in Brewster that we rent, that's going to be 11.7%, okay? Because it's 5.7% plus 6%, which is the local option piece. And then on top of that, you're talking about adding another 2.75%. You're talking over 14%. That's not competitive with Maine or New Hampshire or Vermont or Rhode Island or Connecticut. They are all doing the vacation rental tax, most of them are, I don't know if New Hampshire is, but I think most of them are doing it.
Yeah, you gotta go to Delaware.
So make it competitive,
Those
make
are
it
the ones.
statewide,
Yeah.
the same rate, totally, don't even make this having anything to do with the local options or any of the other stuff, because it would be a lot simpler to just have one tax statewide, and you apportion how
Yeah.
much a certain percentage of that could go to, back to the cities and towns to help with tourism things, to help with costs and whatever. And then the other question, the other suggestion that I had, and I sent these emails, an email to you with these,
Yeah, and I
make
think
it
I've got- yeah.
user-friendly, so that those of us are paying, in Maine, we pay those taxes twice a year. We have a Maine, a taxpayer ID number for Maine. We pay those taxes twice a year, in January and July.
Yep.
So as opposed to paying, like every month or whatever. So that every 6 months, we have to calculate how much we brought in for taxes, and then we send one check off
Yep.
to Maine for the taxes that we've collected in that 6-month period. That would be a lot easier for those seniors here that are trying to, and other people that are renting second homes and whatever. And then, I'm also suggesting that you make them exempt if they rent less than 15 days, like in Maine. Again, look at Maine's got it done, they've been doing this for like 7 or 8 years. When we first bought our house up there, they didn't have a tax, and they added, but they did it smart. And they did it with if you rent less than 15 days a year, you don't bother with it. If it's, and
50 or
then if it's,
15.
and then if it's over 30 consecutive days, you don't, so like to the same person, in
Yeah.
other words, like, so.
Yes.
So the other concern is that when you've got people here that are renting their homes to J1 visa students or H2B visa students or whatever, that they could be exempt that way because they're renting to somebody who's here to
Absolutely.
work. And so
Yeah, they're exempted in the current bills.
Yeah, no.
and I'm also asking that you
Tenants are
make it
gonna work.
competitive with other New England states.
So I think I'm really glad you brought up the Maine example, right, around how you pay those taxes. Because this was the biggest question I had, right? Like, how are people gonna do this, right? I mean, if this is, and if this is something that people are having to do every week or even every month, from a cash flow perspective, that's really tough. And from, so Sarah Peak and I, my colleague, asked the Department of Revenue about sort of like, well, how would you go about doing this? And the suggestion we received back is that they would treat this how B&Bs do revenue to the state, so they do it quarterly. If you don't pay, but say if you don't have a certain number, over a certain threshold, right, you're not renting significantly, right, in an off season, that you're only required to pay quarterly for when you're actually renting. So for here, that would probably mean, maybe you'd get in the second quarter, I don't actually even know, depending on what the cash flow would be, whether or not you'd even have to pay at the end of the second quarter, but it would be something you'd pay at the end of the third quarter, the fourth quarter. There's an online portal, you're given a tax ID number. It's been described to me as relatively simple. I think it's essential that it be relatively simple, just for a whole host of reasons. And so that's something that I support, I know Sarah Peak supports, and actually if you talk to the Department of Revenue folks, they really want, and the state really wants sort of a consistent way for that to be paid, right? There's nothing worse than having to say, all right, how are we collecting these resources? And so by mirroring what they do with the local option, essentially the state collects all those resources quarterly, and then they cut a check back to the towns quarterly. I think this local option, I mean, we are statewide at 5.7%, and that proposal has been consistent. The challenge here is just sort of baked in around to how we do sort of local government in Massachusetts, right? We have 351 distinct local towns, and each of them, I mean, you folks know on the Cape, right? Brewster is different than Orleans, and how they want to do business is different. Is it efficient? I don't think so. Would you ever imagine, from a governing perspective, that you'd have a peninsula of 200,000 people and you chop it up into 15 towns at varying size from 2,000 people to 40, right? That doesn't make sense, but that's the world we're living in. And so I think this—
It doesn't have to be. What I'm saying is, if you could keep this as a totally separate tax,
Yeah.
it's a state tax that you tax.
So this is a state tax.
Vacation rentals,
Yeah.
and it's a state tax, and then you apportion a certain percentage goes back to the cities and towns, or back, back to the state.
Excuse me, he is already beyond the time that he's going to leave, and we are happy to stay, Jeff and I and our team afterwards, but the senator would like to wrap it up and have a couple of.
Yeah, I have some
Also
suggestions.
contact information that we can Yeah, I mean,
So I've got my card and I've got Leslie's card as well, which we'll leave up here. First of all, thank you for your time. I know this is something that you folks are concerned about. I hope we were able to answer some questions about like what we think this will be. There's a piece of this that's a little bit like reading tea leaves, so we're not what the actual legislation is going to be. I think we'll know a lot more when we actually begin to see a bill. What I really suggest, right? I heard sort of 3 areas where I think it would make sense for you folks to work on just some ideas for what sort of potential amendments could be. And I think those relate to a primary residence. I think the primary residence piece is a compelling one. I think especially for individuals who are moving out of their residences. It's a little tricky around how you're going to figure out how you're going to what that criteria is, but I think you folks sort of doing some thinking about that and writing some language around that I think would be helpful.
Feed that to you.
You could feed it to me and we'd at least, I'm at least glad, even if I don't necessarily support it, I'm at least glad to feed it to the committee or to feed it to other colleagues who would file it, right? I'm glad to do that. I think we should have good ideas in our debates and those things should be, those things should be filed. I think the insurance piece and the cash flow piece is also really important. Insurance costs are really, really high here, and I think this may be an opportunity, if this is going, to figure out a way that if we would do something on insurance and coastal insurance, go further on that. I mean, this is a federal issue largely, but I think that's just something that popped out to me from an argument perspective, saying, all right, we're doing this, but folks are going to really need help, need to continue to have help on insurance. So that was the other thing that oh yeah, we'll Leslie's going to specifically find out about the 1099K piece. That's a question. That's a really good question. And I think the final piece is on the delay and sort of the step. What would that proposal be? Is it something that's I would sort of make it reasonable, right? But the more and I think the window, right? I would base it on we need X amount of a window from a booking perspective. Right, so this makes sense, or maybe it's that the state option goes into effect first, and then the local option happens. Is that 1 year? Is that 6 months? Is that 2 years?
One thing I did read in one of the bills, and this might have been last year's bill or whatever. I mean, it went into place the quarter after the legislature voted it, which is like totally not enough time to get your stuff together.
Can I say that's just something like that happening is absurd, and I wouldn't. That's just not realistic. Right. So I think we've got to be smart about that. But I think those 3 pieces, if you guys want to work on language on that, we're glad to be at least a conduit to shop it around and talk about it, because I think those 3 things I think are pretty legitimate concerns. I think the regulatory piece as well, but I feel like folks are fighting that, and there's a lot of input on that one. On the local option piece of it, or actually what I would actually say is basically local enforcement, so it's up to the town what to do. That's a slippery slope, but I really appreciate your time. I'm sorry we couldn't say more. I'm going to leave my business cards up here, and we can pass them on around. Thank you. My pleasure.